My belief system is that money is power and that those who create the money have the most power. And it certainly can be used as a control mechanism. And some people will make money such a love that it will corrupt them. And so really the adage that the love of money is evil, it's corruption, really pertains often. And the problem is, of course, that the powers that be or create the money, the elitist bankers for the most part, know that it can be used as a corruption mechanism. And it is a power tool. And because of that fact, again, the more you consolidate it, you have one bank that becomes the world bank that issues a one world currency cashless system. That would be, from their perspective or their point of view, the ultimate control mechanism.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is David Morgan. David is the publisher of the Morgan Report. He's widely known as the Silver Guru, and he's the co-author of the Silver Manifesto. It's an honor to have him on the show today. David, thanks so much for being on.
Well, Christian, it's first time with you. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I hope everyone knows, I say this about every 5th or 10th interview, that the Silver Guru moniker really is, I take it tongue in cheek. Yes, I've studied the silver market avidly for a very long time. And of course, I write a financial newsletter that covers basically resources, and that's all of them. Silver, I am very aligned toward, but I really don't take myself as seriously as some might. Some really think the Silver Guru moniker has some meaning. I, again, take it kind of lightly, but there have been a few times in different situations where there were some very in-depth questions about the silver market and it's experience, not really superior knowledge. It's old age more than anything else, but, questioning like I had an answer. People, wait a minute, you are the Silver Guru. So I'll leave it at that. But again, thank you for inviting me.
Well, again, thanks for being on. And I'll comment that you hear so much about gold, but I feel like you just don't hear that much about silver. So I'm super interested in learning more about it and having you dispense your insights and such. Wanted to start off asking you, what's your current take on the global economy and financial markets?
Well, global economy, and to be consistent, and of course it comes from, study, but I've been saying for quite some time that the macro picture is a contracting global economy. And this is true. And this was true before the tariffs. Now, the tariffs have accelerated it a great deal. And of course, then it becomes, do you put on an aluminum foil hat or don't you? And I prefer not to. But even with a studied opinion, still an opinion, it was already moving that direction. Tariffs only accelerate the process. Is it deliberate or not? I really do not know. But I will quote Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said, very little happens in politics by accident. So I'll leave it at that. And we can explore it further, but I mean, we can talk about shipping, production, slave labor. I mean, there's a lot of things we can drill down on, but basically the big picture is a contracting economy, which means a lower standard of living for everyone, generally speaking, even the ultra rich. When you have a contracting economy, maybe there's a certain brand of food or whatever that's very exclusive, very high cost, but they can afford it, but it goes out of business. It's no longer available. So it doesn't matter if you're a millionaire, billionaire, or whatever, if that product, service, automobile, whatever it may be, doesn't exist. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. And this is an adjustment that takes place usually in increments of normally 400 years. This is not like a reset from the aspect of it's a new currency every 40 or 50 years or that type of thing. This is from the macro picture, a long-term cycle that really is such a change of what happens on the planet or humanity at large, not just a nation state, that it's a political shift that will be felt from that point forward for probably a few centuries. That's the long, big picture.
Gotcha. And I know you've mentioned, especially on recent shows and such, you've mentioned about bank consolidations being intentional, not accidental, just kind of like the comment you made about Eleanor Roosevelt, things in politics are intentional. But anyhow, if you could kind of share about that and unpack it as far as, the concentration into, a fewer and fewer entities.
Sure. The main thing that I think almost everyone understands, and that's simply that diversification is really the best way to have a society. And, we're taught about, tolerance and respecting others, religious beliefs, national origin, and that type of thing. And I'm all for that. The problem is it's mostly talk, not action, because what happens in, I'll say, the United States schooling system and others, we're not the only ones. Basically, the more and more taking place is conformity, that you're taught to think the same, act the same, have the same values. And that happens naturally in a culture, but in a culture, it becomes a cultural thing. So, it might be a certain food group, like, soul food for the blacks in the South primarily, or wherever it's from. And these influences, which really flavors the human experience. It's great to see other cultures and learn different things. That's kind of broken apart. The idea being, if you want to look at George Soros and others, is basically a mix match of every culture moving together. So instead of getting a black or white, you've got this gray that's pervasive, and everything's sort of a blurry, fuzzy gray. There isn't as much differential between it. So you lose that culture. I mean, Native American culture would probably be a prime example for what I would say is an embarrassment to uh, to Americans at large. And my generation really had nothing to do with it, but you could certainly study it and reflect on it, be empathetic and compassionate about it. I'm not an activist in that area, although I've engaged, but I'm a little off track. The point being is that I'll make a metaphor, and this is what centralization does. So they use usually the idea that we're all created equal. And what that means at law is that we're all created equal under the law, but diversification is paramount. In fact, in the American experience, originally it was about the individual rights, the same laws, applicability, same laws, rules, and accountability was the same for everybody, regardless of their status, religious origin, or that type of thing. So here's my metaphor: instead of respecting everybody for who they are, respecting the individual and trying to maintain an environment where everybody has their individuality protected and enjoyed and really explored, it becomes a gray. And what is a gray? A gray is that there's 30 kids in the classroom, they're all in the third grade, they all bring their lunch from home. And since everybody's equal, no one gets their packed lunch from their parent or their housekeeper or whatever it is. Everybody dumps their food into the magic blender in the middle of the room. They blend it all up, and everybody gets an equal amount of the same lunch. And that's the metaphor for how they blend society together so they're all uniform. And now that's a rather harsh metaphor, but it's a good one, of the idea that this commonality, this uniformity, this everyone's going to wear a uniform, everybody's going to act the same, think the same, do the same. And this really comes into AI and so many other things. So I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you got. I probably prompted a few thoughts or questions for you. And this is what I'm really against. I mean, freedom not only means freedom to do what within the law, and talk law, what level. I'd say, from a spiritual standpoint, really the inalienable rights. Point again is that we're in a situation where the talk sounds good, but the walk is totally different. And when you centralize everything, it makes it easier and easier to manipulate the masses and make a commonality that's required. And if you're outside the mainstream thinking, or what I call the box, then you either are taught to conform or you're ostracized. That's the direction we're heading.
Yeah, kind of the along those same lines. You're reminding me of like early modern Europe, right, where Europe was fractionalized and just a bunch of city states and this and that. And then I guess you could use the analogy of kind of what the concern is now, if you will, to early France in a sense, right? It's a bunch of warring parties, if you will, and then you had it consolidated into an absolutist form of government. So I guess that'd be kind of my analogy as it relates to monetary and the whole world order, if you want to call it that.
Exactly.
Wanted to add. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm done.
I was going to ask as it pertains to obviously the monetary system, CBDCs, things of that nature. Obviously, the BIS has advocated for kind of a cashless, centralized system, built on these digital currencies. Could you unpack and dispense kind of your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'll start kind of at the top of my thinking, and that is, my belief system is that money is power, and that those who create the money have the most power, and it certainly can be used as a control mechanism. And some people will make money such a love that it will corrupt them. And so, really, the adage that the love of money is evil, it's corruption, really pertains often. And the problem is, of course, that the powers that be or create the money, the elitist bankers for the most part, know that it can be used as a corruption mechanism, and it is a power tool. And because of that fact, again, the more you consolidate it, you have one bank that becomes the world bank that issues a one world currency, cashless system. That would be to from their perspective or their point of view, the ultimate control mechanism. And this is the direction we're heading. I don't know if we'll ever get there. I'm not saying we are. Taught as an engineer, you're taught to think at the extremes. When you integrate a function, you look at all possibilities. I'm not trying to teach math to anybody, but anyone can pick up on the common sense or the idea in layman's language when you look at an algorithm of forcing function, mathematical formula. You look at it from zero to infinity. Why? Because if you look at the function from zero to infinity, you've caught all cases. And so that's sort of how my thinking goes. So my thinking that I just gave you about a one world bank with one world currency, that's the zero or the infinity case. I'm thinking of the ultimate. Doesn't mean we'll ever get there. If you solve that equation between zero and infinity, you never get to one or the other. It's somewhere between those two. But if you think at the extremes, then you're able to really think through it in most cases in a rather holistic, holistic way. So that's my thinking, and that's really disheartening to me because my basic mission statement is to teach and empower people. I mean all people worldwide to understand the benefits of an honest monetary system because we have freedom of money where the people choose what it is rather than some authority figure. We have a lot more freedom. The idea of free money and freedom really go hand in hand. It's not the only thing, but if you have the power of money and the bankers don't, you do have the power. And of course, in some ways, anyone that makes a lot of money will have more power than someone that does it in most cases. Certainly, I'm not talking at a spiritual level, which is superior. I'm going to stay at the ground level. But we're at a point where if you have a lot of money and you have a problem with, say, law enforcement, if you got enough money, you can probably get a smart enough lawyer to get your sentence reduced or maybe ignored or whatever. Whereas if you're just a commoner and you have the same crime, you might end up, serving time. And this is against the ideal that, we're all equal, same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody, be it the lowest to the highest, applies equally. And of course, that's gone by and by for, a very long time ago.
There's so many different avenues I could take with what you with what you just said, but I'll add as it relates to natural rights, free will, things of that nature. I remember you mentioning about there being talk of leveraging artificial intelligence as a means to more or less control. I know this is sounding kind of out there, but you get where I'm coming from as it relates to like digital currencies, like you did X, and so therefore there's a lack of human judgment involved, that it's code behind decision making. That was one thing I heard you mention about, if you care to share about that.
Well, that's where we're going. I mean, this artificial intelligence really, like anything, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there's a good and bad, and then of course there's a point in between those. But certainly it can be used. I've used it occasionally, and it's been interesting to see the capabilities of it and some of my expertise and how good it really is, it's not perfect. But the idea of an algorithm making a decision on a human being really upsets my thinking because in uh, in the human realm, we have compassion, we have empathy, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath, but most humans are empathetic and compassionate at some level. So if you're in a courtroom and someone had mitigating circumstances, the judge might say, I understand, I'm here to serve the letter of the law, but I've got a human side. And since you were and the circumstances dictated, let's say, a lesser sentence, or I'll let it go, or you learn your lesson, or whatever, you could do that. If you're in an algorithm only, it's very clear cut, and there is no compassion. Now, it might be programmed in. I mean, I'm not going to say that, the coders are going to say, oh, if it's wrong, we could do that or whatever, possibly. The whole idea is basically to restrict um, really freedom of thought if you really analyze it. And this is because the algorithms will feed back into your own bubble over and over again. So that if you're on the conservative side, it will continue to feed you your feeds on, let's say, YouTube or Facebook or what have you, more and more to continue your belief system. And and that would work if you're on what's modern day liberal, and so it actually fortifies your thinking. The problem is that they're both in the matrix. I mean, I just watched a few videos that were fed to me about Keanu Reeves and what he really thought about some of the scenes in the matrix that were cut out. And the one scene that really fascinated me was that when Morpheus gives him the red pill and the blue pill, he said, and if I heard it right, and I'm sure I did, that the original had two colorless pills. So it didn't matter which one he took. Even if you are escaping the matrix, that is a program in and of itself. And that program is, I'm escaping the matrix, but in reality, you're still locked in it. Now, that's something to contemplate because, we have a lot of the truthers, the freedom movement, people like me that would put me in a box, and deservedly so. I mean, I certainly have strong opinions. I've voiced them for years on the internet, and people pretty much have a good feel for my head and my heart. And that's the real me, it's the authentic self. But nonetheless, am I still locked in the matrix, just thinking that I'm rebelling when really that's just a construct as well? Again, I'm not trying to blow your mind, but it is something to think about because, in the bigger picture, if they want control, as long as you fit within this parameter, you can think whatever you want and you get a feedback loop and feel good because you're on the correct side. Left, right, red, blue, or in between doesn't really matter. You're fed the belief that you're right or you're correct or you're better than or whatever it may be. And as long as you fit within the parameters, it really doesn't matter. To make it crystal clear, and I know you've already caught on to what I'm saying, but as Amir Rothschild purportedly said, let me control the currency and I care not the money and I care not who makes its laws. So as long as I've still got the power of the money system, you could be at any place you want within the system as long as you're in the system.
And to parallel that level of like power centralization, of course, when we talk about finance and such, there's always talk of like the BIS and all that. And circling back to what you mentioned about the algorithms, I've heard some people, postulate that, on that same level with maybe BIS people or what have you, are the social media or the engines that are creating these algorithms, right? That are able to really inculcate you and your viewers or whoever has their respective interests into fill in the blank. So yeah, definitely definitely interesting topic. Now, as far as AI goes and things of that nature, are you leveraging that quite a bit for those in the audience who aren't aware in your own analysis of the markets? Could you share perhaps tools or resources that you're maybe you're actively using or that you're intending to use at some point in the future that you're observing?
I haven't used it much. I've experimented a bit because it is an interesting topic, but I've used Chat GPT. That's about the only one. I've looked at a couple others. One I asked it to. I did my weekly perspective, which is just me and a camera, and I basically take screenshots of my website, my Twitter feed, news articles from Reuters or whatever. Credit to everyone, of course, within the copyright laws. And I asked it to make a video. It did a rather less than adequate job, but I just wanted to see what it could do. And then I did send it some information in a general way on like the silver market and asked it to write me a summary. And it was really okay. I'd give it like a B minus. It had the numbers wrong. It had the high and low on silver wrong. It had the lease rates incorrect. Stuff that I know the numbers off the top of my head. Of course, it wouldn't, but wherever it searched for the web and got the data, it got bad data. So unless pretty acquainted with the numbers, which I am, someone that wasn't as acquainted with the numbers might have gone ahead and posted that and, been called out because the numbers were off rather significantly. So that's about as far as I've gotten. I think I'm going to continue to experiment here and there. Uh, Sometimes I think it's a good check too to see something to rewrite it. I've done that a couple times and might save time on editing. You know, I haven't written any books in a long time, but as far as writing, part of the newsletter, or maybe actually sometimes I use it for questions that come to me because people can be wordy and perhaps not use that good grammar. So I'll just paste it in and say, rewrite it in, proper context to make it simple, as clear and simple as possible. And I'll take 6 sentences and get it down to 3, something like that.
One of the things that I've been doing, I know this is kind of tangential, is if there's a really long video, let's say it's on YouTube or what have you, I'll take the transcript, I'll put it into ChatGPT, I'll tell it, summarize this into bullet points. So instead of
Yeah.
watching a 2 hour long video, right, it's like, boom, like there's the main meat and potatoes and then on to the next thing. As it relates to the silver market, as it relates to the silver market and such, could you share perhaps any flashpoints or any things going on around the world that you're observing, or the current administration's influence on that market, things of that nature?
Yeah, the silver market's almost an enigma. I mean, there's so many things about it that a lot of people don't know, even people that are silver investors, and some, know as much as me. I won't say, oh, I'm the silver guru, but what I will say is that one of the facts that I really love to have in hand and get, some objective reality on is how much silver is used in the military. And that, of course, is very well protected. Now, are those numbers available? And the answer is no, they are not. I mean, specific issues such as maybe how much is used in a torpedo or a certain missile, and even those sometimes they vary by an order of magnitude. People don't know what that means. That's a factor of 10. So, if one source says it takes 100 ounces for this missile, and another source says it takes 1,000, that's a factor of 10, and you can find those on the web, and both look like reliable sources. So that's more or less in minutia. Really want to know is how much does the military, on aggregate, on whole, use silver? And you don't know. What you do know is that there's this much for batteries, there's this much for brazing, there's this much for soldering, and all those fall into the military application. It's just not broken out. So that's one enigma. The other one is the idea that silver is really just an industrial metal, that the amount that's bought and used for investment or safe haven purposes doesn't really count to the overall silver equation. It's just a stockpile above ground to be used at another time. And yet on the gold side, its basic use is money and money alone. Yes, it's jewelry, and sure, there are some applications for gold in the aircraft industry and aerospace and here and there, but it's a very, very small percentage. So it's interesting, they both get graded differently. One's graded as an investment asset with high function as money, particularly by the central banking community. And the other one, that when we were basically on a silver standard back about the late 18 to 1900s, China was the last to go off a full silver standard. It's no longer money 125 years later. It's only an industrial metal, and what people own as a safe haven really is just a stockpile for the industrial users later on. And to back that up, there used to be, and there may still be, but it's gone dark, or it has, disbanded, and that was the Silver Users Association. I don't know how much is left on the web, but the Silver Users Association was just that. And there really isn't an oil users association or a wheat eaters association whose mandate is basically to make sure that what they use for their main product line is held within a manageable level so that they maintain a high profit margin. You don't see that in any other commodity. So I find that rather fascinating. The other one is the amount of paper silver versus the amount of physical silver that's existed on the COMEX for years. In most commodities, be it an agricultural commodity, a soft, or um, any other one you want to think of, energy, the overlay amount of paper that's held versus the physicals, like 5 days, 10 days, 20 days, that type of thing. In silver, it's several months. So, what it really shows you is how much paper is moved versus how much physical is moved. And of course, when you create a paper contract, unless it's delivered upon, you're actually making a bigger supply. And there is no limit to the supply, even though it's supposed to be, according to the COMEX rules. They kind of look the other way. And of course, even if they're within the boundaries of the rules, they do it in the far months. And there's ways to kind of layer these things in. And so I'm not saying silver is the only manipulated market. I think for the most part, they all are. My point being is that it is the most uh, used market as far as the amount of paper to the physical. There's no other market that comes close, really. Gold does somewhat, but not nearly as much as the silver market. So that's interesting. So if you look at the end of the year, you look at the CPM study, or well, CPM does it. I don't think the Silver Institute does. But you see how many contracts and paper were traded in the silver market in a year. I mean, look at the trillions. And it's a $30 billion market. There's 1 billion of ounces mined and recycled times $30 an ounce. That's a 30 billion market. That's a small market, and yet it takes trillions in paper trading to keep the price within a certain bandwidth. Pretty fascinating when you think about it.
How'd you first get into silver, and when were you first exposed to it?
I don't mind telling you, Christian, whatsoever at all, but I've said it so many times. Well, I know this, but no, I was 11 years old, living in San Diego, probably about, I don't know, fourth grader or something. And we lived out in the country, not real far, and my dad gave me 25 cents a week allowance for doing different things around the house and watering this orchard he had. And so I've, been in the country, not very many places to spend it. I'm sort of a natural saver anyway. And one day he gave me a new quarter, and it was a Johnson slug, and everything I got up to that point was 90% silver. And I looked at this thing and what the hell's going on here? I put it in my stack and I looked at the side of it and I go, it's copper or something. And I intrinsically knew as an 11-year-old kid that something isn't right here. Why are they changing this coinage, But I didn't give it a lot of thought. But that did kind of wake me up. And that was, I'd say, the beginning. And I was always fascinated by money because I didn't understand it. And I, asked my dad, like, well, how do you build? I understood how you buy a house. You borrow money from the bank and you get a mortgage and you pay it. That I could understand. But how do you build like a skyscraper? Like, how does you get the money for that? I mean, you can't save enough for that, can you? And so I started to look into it myself and became, I wouldn't say obsessed, but quite curious at a young age about how the system worked. And once I discovered how the banking system actually worked and that they create something for nothing, and then of course I sort of came into the hard money movement or honest money movement, as it was called in my youth, and I started listening to people that were aware of what was really going on, like the Murray Rothbards of the world, and started to understand what the government has done to our money and that type of thinking. It really messed me up and it put me on the path I've been on for a long time, and with some detours. But that's the beginning of it. Just seeing that this piece of metal is equal to this piece of metal, but they're different metals. This is 90% silver. This is nickel and copper, and they're not equal. So why is the value equal? It can't be.
Yeah, if I recall, you had a video up, obviously, handful of years ago. I think it was Ron Paul and Ben Bernanke, him challenging him I think it was during 2012 with the coinage and all. So that was an interesting shot.
Yeah, very much so. That's one of my favorites, and I really was a clip from brother John F. that used to run. I think it was SD Bullion Silver Doctors. Yeah, and he had a lot of commentary, and I commented basically on his comments, and then halfway through the video, I switched the music and went into why freedom's more important than any amount of real money. Because if we don't have our freedom, it doesn't matter how much gold or silver you stack. We've really lost everything. That's one of my favorites because that's sort of my ultimate purpose, I would say. Of course, I already talked about my mission statement, and it's true. But as far as the big picture goes, I want freedom. We all want it. Well, I don't know if we all want it, but certainly I do. I want the choice. If you want a sponsored, house, living quarters, entertainment, healthcare, whatever. That's okay. But you have to have a choice to be able to take that and let's say let's say a UBI, okay, a universal basic income. If that's your choice and it's really what you want, who am I as an individual to tell you as an individual what you should choose? But I want you to have a choice.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like the military, right? I mean, it's basically a socialistic kind of dictatorship, where you get BH, you get TRICARE, you get this, that, and the other. Yeah, but yeah, you get stability, but you give up your sovereignty a bit.
Yeah, you do all the way. Actually, if you ever look at the contract, as we said off air before we started recording, I worked with the Air Force very closely for a number of years. So I almost felt like I was in, but I didn't have the restrictions they had. And sometimes it came through, not in a snotty way or anything like that, just in what I got to do after hours that they didn't, because I had, had, I wouldn't, I'd say freedom. You might call them privileges. I don't know. It depends where you were. If you're on a base, and you're a civilian, you really don't have much difference whether you're civilian or military. But out in the quote unquote real world, you certainly do.
I imagine that shaped you quite a bit, working in that capacity.
It's very interesting. It was a very much of a cognitive dissonance because I love to fly. I love the strain on the brain, the real purpose of it all. But then again, in my heart of hearts, when you're creating, World War III and some of these weapons, I still can't talk about and what the real purpose are. And it's not serving humanity; it's destroying things, not making something productive and to better mankind. That was a hard one for me to really take. So I had that conflict. Am I going to be selfish and love, the flying part, or am I going to, be honest with myself? This really isn't what I want to do with my life. And really, that decision was made for me fairly early, a pretty early age, and I went back into what I liked. I got a degree in finance and moved on from there, and been doing what I'm doing now for many years.
Well, it's amazing how something like the coinage and to your point, at an early age, getting exposed to metals. And I'm in my 30s and I'm just kind of becoming aware of this. and,
Yeah.
and doing these shows is actually very educating for me. And I imagine others as well. And it's so fascinating how money ties in. It sounds redundant, but how much it ties in with every facet of life. And, you look at the average person today. I've mentioned for those in the audience who've listened to my other shows, I've been providing housing since about 2020, and I've noticed kind of an uptick of people twice my age reach out and hearing their stories and such, and it's been very very sobering about people not having retirement or not having this or that, and it all obviously all echoes back to the sound money and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. It's sad in a way because of what the pervasiveness of an unsound system does to people. And these bankers know it. It's not like they don't know from the start. When you have usury and you always have to create new dollars to service the debt of the old dollars, it's a perpetual motion machine that never ends until it stops. Or you hit the reset button. And when I use that as a metaphor, but the reset's what we all keep talking about in our peer group, and that's are we going to have a central bank digital currency? Is there going to be a mark of the beast? Is there going to be this, that, or the other thing? And of course, it's obvious what they want, or it's fairly obvious the elite banking system wants to keep their power and to morph us into a cashless society with different central banks or private bank issued tokenization. And I've been writing about that in my private work, the Premium Service Morgan Report, and it's rather, it can be frightening. I'm not here to pull the fear card at all, but I'm also here to be objective as possible and alert people to what I see and others. I mean, certainly I'm not in a vacuum. I rely on a lot of information. And it is such an interesting time to be alive. And I know it's my favorite word, but it really is because so much is happening and it's quickening. It's happening faster and faster and faster. Just as a quick aside, I'd say about a decade ago, I could kind of rest somewhat and, maybe kind of goof off for a couple of days, come back and really kind of catch up on the main financial news and not miss much. Today, you almost have to be awake, 24/7 just to keep the flow rate is so great in order to not miss anything. You've almost got to be awake 24/7. I'm exaggerating, of course, but there's so much happening so rapidly. And part of it is AI driven because the artificial intelligence, although it's really machine language, and I know that, but just to use the AI moniker, it's developing uh, more rapidly. And so this information age is exploding in an exponential way. And the human mind doesn't work in an exponential way. So we're at a situation where you do or could feel as if, well, I need that brain chip just to keep up. I'm not saying anyone should take it. I'm not saying you should even do it. But the thought occurred to me before it actually materialized. I was thinking about, well, I'm going to need a chip to keep up as a metaphor. I'm not favorable of taking a Neurolink. Some people may be, but that was the idea.
Yeah, I have speculated on it. I suspect that there will be some divergence at some point in time if you have a cohort where they have something implanted and you think quicker, you perform better, et cetera. And then you have the group that wants, call it their agency or whatever. How are they supposed to compete economically with that, especially if it's other countries? So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, it is a great thought experiment, and I think your generation is going to face that as far as I am concerned. I may slip out of here before I really have to make a decision, but I think anyone in your age group, you're going to have to face that with a yes or a no.
Now, I wanted to also ask you, are there perhaps some lesser known things as it relates to perhaps silver or the markets that you don't feel gets enough attention?
Well, one of them is silver as a safe haven status. I mean, right now the idea is more and more that silver is just an industrial commodity. I mean, there's people that I consider to be certainly in my peer group and maybe superior intellectually or not. I mean, I try not to, you know, look at the differences, but though they will absolutely say silver is not money, and yet it really is. First of all, legally it's money. There's no doubt about that. Economically, it's not money because if you use it as money, you can't take a $1 silver coin and spend something that's worth 30, 35 in fiat. It's stupid to do so, but legally it still has to be accepted. On the point I want to make, it's safe haven status. First of all, the word silver and money is the same word in all the Romance languages. Secondly, India has in the past had a huge propensity to use silver as a safe haven. As it became more and more westernized and the average per capita income continued to increase more and more, they started to favor gold more and more. And that's fine. It's the free market making a decision. But they have not given up on silver, and a lot of Indians have pretty much come back to silver because they're pretty shrewd people. They really do not trust the government currency and never really have. And because they have a history of it becoming worthless, they now are looking at the gold silver ratio and looking at silver as probably a better buy than gold is. And that's what 1.3 billion people in India. I'm not saying all of them are buying silver, but the ratio is in a situation where they're very much more apt to buy silver. I just got an update from, I only have a few Chinese contacts that live in China. One worked with me for a number of years, but there's a guy on the internet I made friends with, and he's been very kind to me. And he only he can take English and translate it, and he can write back, wrote me back in Chinese. I translated it. Got a pretty good feel for the retail silver market in the larger cities in China. It's not as strong as I thought it was. Of course, I am somewhat biased, but it is there. And of course, the Shanghai Futures Exchange has become more and more powerful as time has gone on, and I think will continue to do so. So, gold is a primary way that the Chinese are spending their savings now, whereas before it was almost all real estate, something like 90%. And now it's backed off of that because the real estate markets in China are not all that they once were. And so the people are saying, I don't want more real estate. It's not, you know, producing an income or it's not going up in value. Gold's the place to be. Some of that's spilling over to silver, but they do not make silver that readily available outside of the Shanghai Futures Exchange, which is primarily a physical exchange. Of course, it's a futures market as well. So I think the idea that silver is only industrial is incorrect. I think also that the amount of silver used in solar is not accurately reported. One of my team writes for the Ronnie Stoffele that does the Gold and Gold We Trust report. He writes the silver part. He works, I say, for me or with me. He's an independent contractor, so he's not my employee, but he's part of the Morgan Report team. I just got off the phone with him today, this morning, and we were talking about how the numbers just don't add up for solar. Some of the others as well, but primarily. So once the report's published, I can't do it ahead of time because I don't want any copyright violations. I'll be interviewing him as one of the team members and kind of giving a synopsis on what he wrote in this year's silver report for In Gold We Trust. And I think it may be, for those that like to follow this market, kind of a reiteration. There's others in the community that have already made those statements. Our numbers are somewhat different than theirs, but the idea is the same, that we're not getting accurate reporting on the amount of silver usage. And I've shown a chart by Matt Watson, who I met through the Silver Institute. Great guy. He's analyst such as myself, but he's does all the metals. I mean, the real exotics like iridium, tellurium, and some that you can't even pronounce off the periodic table. I don't go into those, although we look at the big ones, copper, tin. We're going to talk about titanium in the next report. But regardless, he dives real deep on some of the exotics and silver and gold as well. And what he shows for just industrial use of silver only, we're pretty much at a point where we're at an inflection where all of the silver used and recycled is going in. So anything above and beyond that for investment demand or pure speculation, if you want to think of it that way, will take it outside of the available silver, which means you're eating the above ground stockpile. So silver doesn't care what you buy it for. It never asks when you ship a pallet of silver bars, am I being used for the automotive industry, or am I going to be stored in a warehouse somewhere for investment purposes? It doesn't care. Demand is demand. And the one most flexible demand is investment demand. It could go from a high of 2021 of 500 or 320 million ounces to the last couple of years where it's been 50, 60 million ounces on the investment side for institutions, and the normal 200 million ounces of the stacking community or the retail investor. So backing up, making it a little more clear, in 2021, the total investment demand, institutions and retail, was 520 million ounces. Today, in the last couple of years, it's been in like the 250 million ounces, with only 50 million being institutional. But I think there'll be a time where the institutions, maybe at the low level, like a sovereign wealth fund, a large family office, maybe a small nation state, maybe India, maybe a large nation state, says, you know what, gold to silver ratio is 100 to 1. Yeah, we got a pretty big warehouse over here. Let's swap some of our gold for silver. It wouldn't take too many of those people to do that, and all of a sudden there's a real silver shortage from the aspect of, wait a minute, there's not enough for industry. Now industry's going to have to buy it from stronger hands, or find a substitute or whatever. So you could have competing forces for silver in the near future. Industrial demand is not going away. It can ebb and flow up and down, but overall the trend is strongly up, especially in solar. If it continues, it's probably will. And then invested demand, I think, is destined to increase as well, because as we get closer and closer to less choice in what our monetary units are, and people discover that silver and gold are sovereign, they're outside the system, you don't have to worry about electricity, and they're pretty much private, I think you'll see more and more people moving into the metals.
And as it relates to silver, metals, or the market, or geopolitically, anything else you want to add? Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
No, there isn't, but I'll just go back to when I wrote the 10 Rules of Silver Investing. You probably heard it on another podcast, but I was asked to write the 10 rules. I was from that investing rules handbook. They trying to single out who is the best at mutual funds, limited partnerships, commodities, options, or whatever. And they get very specific in different groups. You only get 2 pages in the book for no matter what it is, real estate or whatever. So they said make it pithy. So by 10 rules, rule number one, no one wants to be a prophet of doom. But in the unlikely event of an all out financial collapse, silver will be the money of last resort. Reason? Gold has too much of a value per unit than silver does. Therefore, silver would be used in everyday transactions. And because of this possibility, everyone should have some silver available. That was rule number one. And of course, I made not a joke, but I made a video on that topic many years ago. It's called Myths in Silver. And it talks about what the average bullion dealer, coin dealer will tell you in North America and other parts of the planet, but primarily in North America. The golden statement is everyone should own a little. So I played off of that. Everyone should own a little silver. Well, what does that mean? I said, well, first of all, we have to define what a little is. It's ambiguous, but I'd say, let's say 2 or 3 ounces. I'd say that's a little. At today's price of $30 the ounce, that's roughly $100 for 3 ounces. So if you take the population of the United States at the time was like 320 million, so 3 times 3, you're looking at 900 million ounces, which is roughly the entire silver market. And that's people buying 3 ounces, which will not change their lifestyle. You're not $100 in silver is not going to change your wealth status at all. Even if silver goes to $1,000 an ounce, it might help. I mean, it goes 1,000 an ounce, then yeah, you got $3,000 instead of 300, but that's still not going to buy you a house or a car. Anyway, the point is, if everyone in America bought a little silver, it'd wipe out the entire silver market year over year over year. And the United States is 5% of the world's population. So we're talking about if everyone buys a little and only a little buy a little, which is 5% of the population worldwide, we're talking about a very small market. And that was my point. But silver doesn't get the backing that gold does, because gold, even though it's poo-pooed on the main financial channels, it's watch what we do, not what we say. And central banks have been buying gold hand over fist for several years, especially the latter years. They know why, they have it for a reason, and they keep accumulating it for a reason. If silver held the same status as a monetary asset, then the gold silver ratio would have to adjust substantially. If you go back into like my grandfather's era, $1 a day was a pretty much average wage. And $1 by weight by US law is basically 3/4 of an ounce, but let's just round it up to an ounce. And I know that today's dollar printed by the Treasury, the Silver Liberty, commonly known as the Silver Eagle, is 1 ounce, but it's overweight by about 1/4 of an ounce because 3/4 of an ounce. 0.77 troy ounces is actually the weight of a dollar. So anyway, $1 a day. So I looked it up on Google about a year ago, and the average wage, believe it or not, was much higher than I thought. The average wage in the U.S. was like $25 an hour. So if you take an 8-hour day, that's $200. So at $1 a day, that would, rough math in your head, an ounce of silver would be $200 if you were going to pay equivalent of what it was in my grandfather's era.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning something to the effect of like going into Starbucks, like kind of like a scenario, and or being willing, offering to pay in that form of payment versus cash or something of that nature, and there being resistance or what have you. But a lot of interesting points you've made.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, Christian. I'm here if you got any more. I
Yeah.
can talk the topic for as long as you like. I really do want people to understand, though, that there's more important things in life than money. But the problem is that when it's scarce, short supply, or it's devalued quickly, as we've witnessed the last couple of years, it really causes a lot of hardship on people. And it was, I think, on one of the shows that you're referring to, of how many people in the United States really are hurting. Oh, I know. It was a Sound Money interview I did earlier in the week. You haven't seen it yet. It's not been posted yet. And I don't know if I believe it or not. I don't know, but I trust the interviewer. And I think it was like 4 out of 5 Americans are ill-equipped for retirement. It's a very large percentage.
Spooky, very spooky. And time will tell, of course. So, David, thanks so much for being on. How can people learn more about you and get in touch?
Yeah, it's easy to get a hold of me. I mean, there's several ways to do it. One of the easiest ways is just go to a search engine and type in David Morgan Silver. It'll pop up the website, the YouTube channel, the Twitter feed, everything, the books I've written, all kinds of stuff. Other ways, go to the main website, themorganreport.com. And if you go there, all the icons for our YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook uh, channels, Twitter are all up there in the little icons on the upper right hand side of the website. Then there's a pull down menu, the blog. It's a video blog primarily. Everything I do in the public domain is posted for free. And, you can visit the sales page for the paid subscription. There is consultations available. None of the books are available, really. They are available in the aftermarket, but probably not going to publish any more books. I am working on a film. It's been filmed. It's being edited now. It should be out by the end of the summer. It's called Silver Sunrise, and the URL for that, silversunrise.tv. Several trailers there, one with Foster Gamble from the Thrive movie, a couple with G. Edward Griffin, Creature from Jekyll Island. He's in the film. Some of the women, like Ellen Brand, who wrote Web of Debt. She's a big proponent of state banking and makes a great hard case for that. So a lot of interesting people I've met over the years. I know all of them, I believe, that are in the movie, all pretty much on a first name basis. But it's more about the spiritual side of money. What we talked about at the beginning. Is money power? And if it is, does it have control over people? And if that's true, what can we do to break free and get back to the priceless position that I want everyone to have a choice, and that's freedom.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for being on, and it's been an honor, and I look forward to having you on in the near future.
Christian, my pleasure. Thank you.